leader. If you have not been reading the emails that we send out from the fellowship, I know you're all reading the emails, but you might have missed a big announcement. On Saturday, November 12th, our former intern minister and then assistant minister last year, Allie Peters, will be ordained here at the Fox Valley UU Fellowship. So go back in your email, November 12th. Ordination to the Unitarian Universalist ministry is a big deal. It's a sign of the culmination of all of Allie's training, practice, evaluation, and effort, and it is something that can only happen once in a person's life. If she serves at multiple congregations, she might be installed at multiple congregations, but she's only ordained one time. And she's chosen us to be the congregation that bestows upon her the mantle of ministry. It's a beautiful honor, a big ceremony. It will be followed by a fun celebration with a DJ. So I hope you all make every effort to be there. There will be many things that happen during that service of ordination. There will be a chalice lighting and extinguishing, of course. There will be music and a sermon. There will be a big rite, which we will all take part in, called the laying on of hands. And there will be also something that comes to us from our Unitarian ancestors. It's called the hand of fellowship, and it's very complicated. Let me try to explain it to you. It's a handshake. That's it. I was kidding about it being complex. It's just a handshake from one ordained UU minister to another, to the one that is being ordained. That's it. My mentor, before I went to seminary, Bill Neely, gave me the hand of fellowship at my own ordination, which I realized, interestingly, today is the 11th anniversary of that special day when I was welcomed into the UU ministry. Thank you. It's hard to believe it was 11 years ago. But the thing about the hand of fellowship that I find so powerful is that Bill also received the hand of fellowship from another minister. And that minister also received the hand of fellowship from another one. And we can trace our connections back, all the way back to William Ellery Channing, or perhaps even further, who are, in essence, my ancestors in ministry. This past week, Hannah and I had the joy of attending a retreat of UU ministers from our regional chapter. Jim Coakley also joined us. We carpooled. It was fun. The Appleton contingent showing up. It was a pretty wide geographic area of folks that were coming together, most of Wisconsin, Illinois, parts of Michigan and Missouri, so we had to come together from far away, and it was a good week of connection and learning. The program was led by a man named Johnny, who was from the Lakota Nation, and he brought with him one of their wisdom keepers, or elders, Ben, who also shared during the program. And I won't delve into the details of the program, but one of the elements was an emphasis on remembering our ancestors who brought us to the current day. Now, of course, when Johnny and Ben speak of their ancestors, they are referring to those from their nation who fought, died, and survived great hardship so that they could still be here today teaching those of us willing to learn. The poet Alice Walker once wrote, "To acknowledge our ancestors means we are aware that we did not make ourselves, that the line stretches all the way back to God, or perhaps to gods. We remember them because it is an easy thing to forget, that we are not the first to suffer, rebel, fight, love, and die. The grace with which we embrace life in spite of the pain and the sorrow is always a measure of what has gone before." Ancestors might be our blood or our family line, but they also might be more than that or different than that. The ancestors who passed along their hand of fellowship to each of us in the Unitarian Universalist ministry, the ancestors who mentored and taught each student who then became a professor in Meg's field of physics. Those like Carolyn Herschel, who were the first to be paid in their field in spite of her gender. One of the events of the ministers' retreat that we attended this past week is something that happens at each of these annual retreats, but of course it hasn't had a chance to happen in a few years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's called the Odyssey. And it's when one of our longtime ministry colleagues is chosen well in advance and invited to share their story. They're given a big chunk of time to do this, usually about 90 minutes, but this one lasted well over 2 hours. And the members of the chapter listen and hear what their lives and ministries were like. Attending the Odyssey this year felt very much like sitting at the feet of a wise elder. In this case, our elder was Mary Moore, who has for the last several years served a number of interim ministries in various Midwest states, though she had a much longer ministry than that. We heard Mary tell us the story of how she gathered in a hotel room with several other women who were either in training or already UU ministers, and that was like it. That was it for women ministers in that room. And she took two of the older women, for lunch and asked them if she, a seminarian, if she could do this ministry thing as a woman, especially because she wanted to also get married and have children. Could she do that? And those two both responded that no one that they knew had ever done it. Mary did it. Hannah and I have her to thank for helping pave the path before us for what ministry could look like for women who also want to have families. And the cool thing about Ancestors is we're adding to them all the time. Their numbers are growing. My UU colleague in Racine, Wisconsin, the Reverend Danielle Lindstrom, will be the one to give Allie the hand of fellowship at her ordination in November. Danielle will then join that chain of ministers all the way back and will link Allie in that chain, that web that points to the future. The UU minister and social justice activist, the Reverend Peter Rabel, is quoted as saying, "We sit in the shade of trees we did not plant." In fact, the words are longer than that. It goes, "We build on foundations we did not lay. We warm ourselves by fires we did not light. We sit in the shade of trees we did not plant. We drink from wells we did not dig. We profit from persons we did not know, and this is as it should be. Together we are more than any one person could be. Together we build across the generations. Together we renew our hope and faith in the life that is yet to unfold." But that part about the shade and the trees, that's the motto for our Acorn Society here at the Fellowship, which is not a complex society to join. There's not even a handshake. It's simply the group of people who have either made a donation to our endowment fund or who have noted in their will that part of their money will go to the Fellowship's endowment when they die. Those are the members of our Acorn Society. Now, our endowment is an account of money that is invested in the UUA's National Common Endowment Fund, because we recognize that pooling our money together allows us to make more powerful and impactful investments. And in fact, they strive to make ethical investments on our behalf. Our money has helped shift corporations away from unethical practices because they were afraid they would lose those investments. But our part of that money is ours. We get to keep it, and it will grow as more and more people add to the endowment fund. And as long as we exist, we will never touch that money. We will only draw off the interest as the governing board sees fit for future projects or expenses to support the fellowship long into the future. The thing about the endowment is that much of the money that sits inside it was given to us by people who are no longer with us here in life. They're only with us in memory and through their generosity. They are, in essence, the fellowship's ancestors, helping to stretch that line of connection back to the early days of this group. And their gifts are still with us, allowing us to make choices for the flourishing of the future of the fellowship. The acorns that they planted when they made those gifts will eventually grow into trees that they could not imagine. As I watch my own children and the other children of this fellowship, I see them as the new buds on the branches of this tree. The roots planted by our founders have grown and grown, and they've been tended so lovingly by so many people, so many ancestors, bringing us to today. And if we close our eyes, we might imagine those kids that were up here throwing yarn at each other, some of whom are still sitting among us, some who are in the religious education wing, some who are just not here today. Let's imagine those children and youth, some of whom are working for us in our service this afternoon, morning, whatever time it is. What time is it? Let's imagine those children grown up. They grew up, as the song Peter sang for us said. They left our hearts, walked around outside of our bodies, and they had their own families, their own children. And we can imagine them here as adults and the people that they welcome in to this place. New families, new children, new elders that they welcome with open arms, those folks who wish they had found Unitarian Universalism when they were younger. We can imagine those grown-up children lighting this chalice, which will surely last for generations. It is heavy, let me tell you. We can imagine them singing with each other. They can sing the songs we love, or perhaps they will have new songs. We can imagine them giving each other a stone to carry when they're sharing joys or sorrows, and surely, hopefully, they will create new ways of being together that we can't even imagine. And the gifts of our generation will be with them. We will be their ancestors. And as we think about our role as ancestors, we focus differently. Instead of focusing on our own ancestors, we begin to focus on ourselves as ancestors toward the future. But as Johnny and Ben shared with us from their Lakota wisdom, the generations are not necessarily in a line, all facing in one direction. We're a circle where the spirits can move among us. Linear thinking is often scarcity thinking, a narrow view of life and time that forces us into a false choice between honoring those who came before us or honoring those who will come next, between doing everything the way they did in order to honor our ancestors, or letting go of everything they did so that we can survive to the next generation. But scarcity thinking, as we know this month, can create fear. And we've been focusing this month here at the fellowship on escaping that fear, escaping scarcity, not the narrow confines of binary, linear, either or, the mindset of abundance, enoughness, openness, possibility. We don't have to turn our backs on our ancestors to focus on the future. We need to widen our lens so that we can embrace both the ancestors from the past and the descendants who will call us ancestors. When I think back to my own ancestors, I think with gratitude, thankfulness for everything they did to bring us to this time today. But perhaps sometimes I think back on them with sadness for what they had to endure. Often we look back on our ancestors and we think about what we might have done differently to set our families or our society on a different course. If only they had known better. Sometimes we look back with anger, wishing that they had known better. But in our better days, we look back with grace, recognizing the limitations that they faced in their own times and places. And what if we could then look at ourselves in this moment in that same way? What if we could recognize our own actions with gratitude or sadness or maybe anger? Wouldn't that push us towards some changes that are necessary? Or maybe we could look at ourselves sometimes with grace. I'd like to share a poem with you that was written quite recently. It's called The Poem with the Javelin at the End by Seth Simons, and I've shortened it a bit for this purpose. He begins with the quote by fellow poet Dan Sowers: "All poetry is about hope." Thank you, the President, for canceling my debt. I will use this reprieve from hopelessness to write one poem early in which the speaker will discover an absence of hopelessness is not exactly hope, more like emerging from too warm water into the wet air. The great poet Dean Young died this week, and all I have to say about grief, he said better. In a number of books, it should frankly be a crime to be able to write. I am trying my best to love life as it vanishes. It's just the more I love it, the more apparent its vanishing becomes. Everything is so stupid these days, as opposed to the rest of history, which I recently, through the power of mindfulness, experienced all in one flash. Much to unpack. What I'll tell you is Shakespeare was definitely one guy. The strong have never given willingly to the weak, and Peter actually denied Christ 4 times, the last one under his breath. Look, everything's useless until the moment there's a use for it. Even knowledge, even grief, even this anger. I'm told we have to imagine a better future before we can build one, and here I'm stuck imagining a better past. Columbus tripping overboard. Lincoln keeping Hamlin on the ticket. All the other dominoes falling that way instead of the way that they did. Maybe the thing is to imagine the present as if from the future, a very distant future, a world of pristine consequence, understandable only by turning that big bronze telescope to the ancients, e.g. you and me, and whatever it is we're doing here. Graduate students of the future, hello. I hope you are compensated fairly for your labors. I hope your research is funded by an endowment taxed out the wazoo. Mostly, I hope your world is as alien to me as mine is to yours, that I have not, by living this life, condemned you to the torments of my own lineage. May whatever javelin you're sharpening be purely ornamental, a javelin of peace, even a javelin of celebration. I wish I could celebrate with you, but alas, I died many centuries ago, after a long, handsome life, solving all of humanity's problems with my mind. You're welcome. I'm sorry. What if we could see ourselves, not just our individual selves, but our communities, through that great bronze telescope, the way the future generations will when they call us Ancestor? What would we do differently? What changes would we enact more readily? How might we honor our ancestors by carrying forward what they gave us? And then how might we cling to what they gave us a little less so that we might serve the future more? We are caught up, as Martin Luther King said, in an inescapable web of mutuality. May we remember our place in the web and the impacts we have for generations to come. Amen. And may it be so.